The New York Times has a piece today titled 100 Reasons to Love Mel Brooks on his 100th birthday, and it's a celebration worth talking about. Mel Brooks is turning 100 years old this Sunday, and if you don't know his name, you almost certainly know his work. Think Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, Spaceballs, the producers, films that have been making audiences howl for decades. Written by Manohla Dargis and Jason Zinnemann, the piece makes the case that Brooks is, in their words, a funny man, vulgarian, a tour whose imprint on American cinema is incontestable yet scandalously undervalued. Here's what's striking about that claim: in 1974 alone, Brooks had two of the biggest hits of the year, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, both climbing to the top of the box office at the same time. And yet, in Peter Biskind's influential history of that Hollywood era, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, Brooks gets exactly one mention. 1. So what makes Brooks so significant? The writers argue it goes deeper than the laughs. Brooks grew up gorging on movies, spending entire Saturdays at the theater, his mother's sandwiches in hand, watching cartoons, newsreels, and features back to back. His greatest love was the musical, and that passion never left him. His films are packed with song and dance numbers, high and low culture mashed together, physical comedy, and genuine intellectual wit. But there's something more specific at work. Brooks spent his career taking the most mainstream, Gentile mass culture, westerns, James Bond, Star Wars, and filtering it through a distinctly Jewish lens. He didn't smuggle Jewish comedy into popular culture the way Hollywood had traditionally done. He inverted that formula entirely, making everyone sound like a Jew. Cowboys. Robots. Kings. This, the writers argue, is how he made the Jewish comic voice the lingua franca of American comedy. A big part of that legacy traces back to the 2000-Year-Old Man, a comedy album Brooks made with Carl Reiner starting in the late 1950s. Brooks played a heavily accented ancient figure being interviewed about everything from the invention of fire to his personal run-ins with Shakespeare. It began as a private joke at parties, but after comedian George Burns told them to record it or he'd steal the idea himself, it became a phenomenon. Comedians like Larry David and Paul Reiser have called listening to those albums a formative moment in their careers. His films did something similar to what those albums did, they turned nightmares into comedy. The producers, his debut feature, had two crooks staging a musical called Springtime for Hitler as a fraud scheme. Critics at the time, including Pauline Kael, weren't kind. But decades later, critic J. Hoberman reframed it as a rebellion against invisibility, the equivalent of dancing on Hitler's grave. That film now sits in the Library of Congress. And that dancing, as Dargis writes, reaches its apotheosis in the Spanish Inquisition number in History of the World, Part 1, where Brooks plays the real historical torturer Torquemada twinkle-toeing through a dungeon, nuns in swimsuits performing in a giant pool, the whole thing culminating in a pose atop an enormous menorah. Absurdist, technically impressive, and somehow both of its time and completely timeless. 100 years old, and Mel Brooks still hasn't let us forget that sometimes the funniest thing you can do is laugh directly at history's worst moments.